Defenders, Protection of Nature, Human Rights, and the Escazú Agreement. As you mentioned before we went live stream, there is Spanish and Portuguese interpretation being provided during this event. My name is Osprey Oriel Lake, and I am the Executive Director of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, or WECAN. And please, those of you who are joining us on Zoom or on Facebook, it'd be great if you could introduce yourselves in the chat, just so we know where people are coming in from, and we welcome you to this really important event. WECAN is hosting this event with our partner, Reacción Climática, as a formal side event during the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. I'm very, very grateful to be here with all of you to particularly honor the leadership of Indigenous women today. And I'm calling in here from Coast Miwok territory in Northern California. And as we often do on our calls, we uplift the fact of where we are from. If you don't know whose Indigenous lands you're on, please find out. And we really encourage you to engage in supporting Indigenous peoples wherever you live, as many of us are visitors here on Indigenous peoples' lands. And we know that Indigenous peoples are central to the solutions that we need right now. And after years of colonization, it is time that we really take our stand with Indigenous peoples wherever we are. I'm really grateful to have so many incredible friends, colleagues, and partners on this call today to share their knowledge and wisdom with us. And after some opening comments, I'm going to introduce the speakers right before they make their remarks. And then we'll have a time for discussion with all of you with your questions and responses from the speakers. So let's go ahead and get started on this really important topic of the Escazú Agreement. Across Latin America and the Caribbean, women land defenders each carry their own stories of persecution and violence as they protect their forests, waters, the global climate, and their communities. But a very transformative multilateral agreement called the Escazú Agreement could provide a really promising path forward. And we've been campaigning on this for quite some years now. Latin America, as an example, is one of the deadliest regions for environmental land defenders. In the Americas, just last year, 284 human rights defenders were killed that were recorded, accounting for 86% of the global tally. This is according to the campaign group Frontline Defenders. Colombia, which has signed the Escazú Treaty, was the deadliest country for land rights activists and environmentalists last year. And this was reported by Global Witness. So combined with entrenched colonial and patriarchal policies, individuals threatened are often Indigenous peoples and women environmental and human rights defenders. Frontline Indigenous women are frequently the backbones of their communities, knowledge keepers of biodiversity and forests, and leaders in resistance efforts to defend their lands. Unfortunately, the threats experienced by women land defenders are not unusual. The protection of natural areas goes hand in hand with Indigenous rights. Yet largely there's been this gap, a lack of political will at the national and international levels to implement policies and frameworks that ensure the rights and protections of environmental defenders, including their access to decision-making, public information, and justice mechanisms. However, the good news is this unique opportunity and transformative multilateral agreement could provide a promising path forward, but it really depends on what we do as civil society to push this forward. In 2018, countries of Latin America and the Caribbean heeded the calls of civil society and adopted what's called the Regional Agreement for Access to Information, to public participation and access to justice on environmental issues in Latin America and the Caribbean, or LAC region. And this is what is called the Escazú Agreement. And the agreement is really precedent setting according to the fact that there are guarantees to environmental matters and the explicit protection of human rights to environmental defenders. So it's really unusual in that it deals not only with the environment, but recognizes human rights. It's grounded in Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration of the Earth Summit of 1992. It's a legally binding document that does not allow for any revisions by ratifying countries and takes into account vulnerable populations and environmental defenders as a central focus. And several studies have shown that the most effective ways to protect biodiverse regions and forests is to protect the rights and sovereignty of indigenous peoples. So you can see how this is so key when we're talking about the Amazon rainforest as an example, or, really biodiverse regions and the role that indigenous people have played. We know that over 80% of all biodiversity left on Earth is in the hands and lands of indigenous people. So this is important to all of us all over the world. By protecting the rights of indigenous land defenders, the Escazú Agreement is a mechanism that can reinforce efforts to stop environmental degradation and stop human rights violations. The Escazú Agreement was adopted 2 years after the murder of Honduran environmental activist Betty Caceres, which I know many of you are aware of. And at its core, pardon me, the accord carries the dedication and spirit of women's defense of the land. The agreement aims to carry on the legacy of Berta Caceres, as well as the struggles of thousands and thousands of land defenders, particularly women across the LAC region, that stand up to extractivism and injustices in their lands. In a region hard hit by COVID-19, where femicides, domestic violence, and economic insecurity are on the rise, we are witnessing women from all generations take to the streets and to the courtrooms to fight for collective liberation and environmental protection. And just last week, on April 22nd, on Earth Day, the agreement came into full effect, and now we can enter the implementation phase, which is why we wanted to have this meeting today, so that we could all really organize and collect ourselves around a campaign. Women are not only leading the fight for environmental and climate justice and progressive environmental policies, but they are also the visionaries of alternatives and solutions that are critical at this time of multiple expanding crises. With proper implementation of the Escazú Agreement, no more women land defenders will be violently censored, and instead their voices will lead us to the healthy and just world we seek. And this is why WECAN and Reacción Climática and the women on this call are partnering together. We've created a steering committee of women from the LAC region to implement a campaign that includes education, because a lot of course, Indigenous women across this region are not aware of this agreement. We're putting together an advocacy campaign that will work at the government level to really push them for a strong implementation of this agreement. And we are engaging attorneys in each country so that we can look at each country, the local laws, and how the Escaz Agreement can best be applied in each region, as we also reach out to women across the area. So it's a multifaceted campaign. And today we wanted you to hear some about the mechanism of the agreement, but also most especially to hear from Indigenous women land defenders so that we can hear about why this agreement is so important. So they're going to be sharing their stories of how women are being impacted in their regions and what they're really facing, and the life and death struggle that women land defenders are experiencing in their everyday lives. So first, we're going to be hearing today from
Então, primeiro,
Patricia Gualinga,
una amiga muy querida, Patricia Guarín,
Indigenous leader from Sariaco. She's a spokeswoman for Mujeres Amazónicas Defensoras de la Selva in Ecuador. She's also on the WECAN steering committee for this campaign. And I'm so honored that you took time with us today, Patricia, and I hand the floor to you. Thank you. And for those of you speaking English, I just wanted to say, you need to also click on the little globe at the bottom so you can hear her translation in English. Thank you, Patty. Go ahead.
Muchísimas gracias, Osprey.
Thank you very much, Osprey. We are here conscious about the implications of the ratification of the Escazú Agreement, and we hope that this ratification will really land on the territories where the defenders, environmental defenders and women defenders are being killed, and the indigenous leaders have been killed just because they have defended nature and they have defended rights. That is why we also have hope that the governments will really implement these agreements, and it is binding, and overall it is applied in our territories. And one of the things that the agreement says is that we need transparent and clear information that citizens can access, something that doesn't occur in our countries because our governments hide what they do when they want to access natural resources on our territories. And we have been victims of persecution and crime and killing. We hope that with this agreement, this will change. And this will be different for the protection of the rights of defenders. And this is a complement of the rights, the collective rights of indigenous peoples. We want international law and the constitutions to be implemented so we don't have this kind of persecutions in our territories. In our countries, we don't have adequate research of the threats that are being done to women defenders. But any case of threats or killings has been transparent. There is no justice. For the cases of persecution of environmental defenders, there are not appropriate procedures and in our countries, and we hope that this agreement will guide the justice for the crimes that have done that environmental defenders had lost their lives. Indigenous women have put their bodies, their strength, and their life. And thanks to defenders, we have all these possibilities that we have to live in harmony with the planet. We need to be conscious of that, and we as women are going to still be here and watch. So these processes are implemented and there is an appropriate research in the cases as ours. In our case, I have been threatened of killing. Another woman has been burned in her house. Another one has been threatened. And that's how they are trying to kill our voices. We have women that have been victims of sexual violence. And we want this agreement to be a hope, a reason for hope, so these things end. And there is an effective protection for the rights of environmental defenders and women. It's a hope that we really, really want it to happen. And we're not going to wait for it. We're going to demand that it gets implemented. And our countries have the possibility to implement effectively this agreement. Thanks a lot, Osprey, for the invitation, and to all our sisters that are present here.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for joining us. And I'm sure we can learn more during the discussion section, but just to say that, the courage that you have shown, and in your work standing up to the fossil fuel industry in Ecuador has been incredible. And, just for people who are not living in the region, the incredible courage of each of these women it breaks my heart open to hear, because they're fighting for their communities against these threats and have experienced these killings. And I think it's really important just to pause to really let that come into our consciousness, how incredibly serious this is. And these are women who are fighting for all of our water, all of our forests. This is all of our fight. This is not like somewhere out there. This is all of us connected through this fight that these women are having for their own communities, but for all of us. So thank you. And now I would like to introduce Maria Luisa Rafael. She's a Quechua leader and a human rights and environmental activist from Bolivia. And I hand the floor over to you. And I thank you so much, Maria, for joining us. And again, for those of you who might just be coming on, you'll need to click on the globe at the bottom, the interpretation button, and select English if you don't speak Spanish. Please, Maria, please go ahead. Thank you so much for joining us.
Muy buenas tardes, agradecer.
Thanks a lot. Good afternoon. Thanks for this space that you give to us, women, indigenous leaders and defenders for Mother Earth. I also thank to God because it has given us life and it gives our lives, because defend water and territories is defend life itself. And regardless of all the problems that we have worldwide, we cannot make our Mother Earth be respected, make the law be implemented. For example, when we have specific laws that tell us, the mining industries, that they should take care of our lands, but they take our territories and exploit them and take us out of the territories, and we have to migrate to the nearby communities. The situation that we have in Bolivia is that we urgently need human rights on Mother Earth and nature to be respected, and the respect for water. For a long time, we have been in the fight, especially in my community, where almost everybody has been silenced because we don't have the freedom to speak. We have been persecuted, accused. They say that we have particular interests, personal interests, but we fight because our people, we don't want them to die of hunger. Our human rights are being threatened because we don't have freedom of expression. And if at any time we have been happy because we had an indigenous president, sadly, he didn't make Mother Nature be respected. And nobody respects nature, nobody respects life. And that's why we are as we are. I don't know where we're going to get, but if we keep on this fight, it's because God wants it, and we are going to remain in the fight. What I would manifest to everyone at the world level is that we really need to get together, all the environmental defenders and women defenders, so we can make our rights respected and the rights of Mother Earth respected. What does it mean? It means that we need our governments and our authorities to make the law be implemented. And what is said on our political state constitution and the law of Mother Earth needs to be respected. We are not asking for anything else. The respect to our communities and the respect to nature is the own development of our countries. If they do partnerships with the exploitative mining companies, they are threatening Earth. They need to respect the communities and the water sources. In Bolivia, we don't see this. In Bolivia, we see that the environmental defenders are being silenced, and their hand is being extended to the ones that exploit nature and our resources. That's why me as a leader and as a woman defender from Bolivia, I ask for everybody to join us in this fight, because otherwise we're all going to die. Water is life itself. Tomorrow we're not going to be able to eat gold or silver. If we take care of our water, if we take care of our nature, we will have life for long. But if we threaten rights and exploit and kill, we are not going to keep our Mother Nature. Thanks a lot, and I want to thank all the women environmental defenders and defenders from Mother Earth that are here.
Thank you so much, Maria Luisa Rafael from Bolivia, for your incredible leadership, your hard work, and your courage. And again, yeah, I just am so honored that you took time to be with us today. You know, even speaking out and becoming visible can require so much courage coming from Latin America. And we think of you and we stand with you. And that's why we want to do this collective campaign, because we need to protect the women, we need to protect Mother Earth. And these are the women who are literally on the front lines of that fight. So thank you, Maria. Next, I'm very honored to have another dear friend join us, Daira Tucano of the Tucano Indigenous Peoples of the Brazilian Amazon. She's an independent communicator, an extraordinary artist, and cultural leader of great wisdom. And she's going to be sharing with us the fight of Indigenous Women Land Defenders in Brazil. Daira, thanks so much for joining us.
Wow, thank you, Osprey, for this opportunity. I'd like to speak in Portuguese because it's better to think. Então, gostaria de me apresentar, agradecer a oportunidade. Meu nome é Dayara, sou do povo Iepamaçã, povo tucano. Nós vivemos na fronteira entre Brasil, Colômbia e Venezuela. Eu sou pesquisadora de direitos humanos e comunicadora independente, né? Então,
excuse me, Daira, excuse me, I'm so
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you. For some reason, we're not hearing it in English. I just wanted to hang on just one second. Could we?
I can speak in English as well.
No, it's okay. Let's just try can the interpreters, please, who are,
Hello?
let's try that again. Go ahead and speak in Portuguese and let's try it again. Please go ahead. Sorry.
So I'm gonna say it again. It's very important to say that I'm a leader of the human rights in Brazil. And I've been following all the movimentation of the indigenous people in Brazil. It's very important to participate in these spaces like these to tell you about the necessity of these human rights and environment rights in international level. In Brazil, it has changed a lot. The government, how it positions, it has been really aggressing the human rights, the native people. So the movement in Brazil, the indigenous movement in Brazil, has been really relentless and really letting everyone know these crimes, including to indigenous women. In the last years, we have seen marches of women, of the native people, which is very important to give the visibility for these movements. And in this year, what is happening right now in April, we launch an association of indigenous women that are defending the nature in Brazil. And I see that the biggest challenge is really how we don't have the justice. The ones who kill, who invade our space, and they don't get the law to stop them. Last month, we had a really aggressive case of an attack for a women's association, and the people involved in the activities, they were very aggressive towards indigenous women. Indigenous women are very vulnerable to sexual assault, for example. So this dynamic of not having the law on our side and not having the visibility of our fight. So it's important to have more agreements so we are seen. And it's important to know that in our countries, it's really hard for these laws to be respected. In the current government, they really declare that they are against us. The Bolsonaro president, he's being out of the agreements. He's been denying these agreements.
To advance for the interest of mining industries, logging companies, even altering the information and the data, even of the population census, to cover all the crimes that are committed. A lot of efforts are being done in the national level, are made to culpabilize all the people that defend the human rights. So we are calling all the allies in other countries to help us in this moment that we are facing right now, this climatic tragedy, this health tragedy. All this is the responsibility of the politicians. So we need to understand that building a citizen commitment is made through the commitment to protect nature, to protect cultures, to protect the land, because without this, the good living culture, the human rights culture, we are losing the needed time to prepare for next crises that are coming. Maybe the most important crisis that is coming is the water crisis. So if we don't protect our forests, our trees, our water, we are continuing to poisoning our world to the scarcity of what is known as resource in the Occidental culture, but for us it's much more than only a resource. If we protect the land, the water, what the humanity will do in the future, what the life will be in the future. I would like to thank the words of the master women that spoke before me. I would like to wish them strong for the fight in your territories, and to all the allies that are working with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Diara, for your incredible work and leadership in Brazil. And we know that there's a lot of challenge there also now with the COVID-19 crisis on top of protecting the environment. So, know that our hearts and prayers are with you and your loved ones, and so many incredible women leaders in Brazil as well. So I wanted to also just highlight that, that many times when we talk about the defense of land, we think about it in general terms of the indigenous people or local communities that are fighting for forest, as an example, or water. But as we are also hearing from these women, there is a gendered aspect to this work, because particularly women are also, on top of the other injustices, also face sexual violence and intimidation to their families. And there's a whole other host of dangers that women face as women land defenders in this space. So it's one of the reasons that we are particularly putting this campaign together. And I've been seeing people very kindly introducing themselves in the chat section. Thank you for doing that, and asking what to do. So Catherine, I'd really appreciate it if you would put a link to the campaign where they can sign up, or Catherine can also put her email address for those of you who want to work with us on this particular campaign, which is multifaceted. It is involving an educational component where we need to go out into the communities across the LAC region and invite women to be involved in the campaign, to learn more about what their rights are under this new agreement that's gone into effect, as well as really going state by state in Latin America, country by country. And as I mentioned before, legally bringing on different attorneys and lawyers that can really help us specifically define how to implement the Escaz Agreement in particular country laws. So there's a legal component we're working with. And then there's advocacy with the governments themselves to really implement the Escaz Agreement so that it really serves these land defenders, and particularly the women land defenders, and pushing governments as they work towards their collective meeting, which will happen next year, on the agreement, and how we can really push governments to have the most important implementation of the Escazú Agreement so that it is really effective and really serves the women and their communities and the land that they're fighting to protect. So with that, I'm very, very honored now to bring on Carmen Capriles. She is the founder of Reacción Climática in Bolivia. She is our weekend coordinator for the Latin America region, and it's just such an honor to work with her. And she's going to take us into another look into the agreement, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Thank you so much, Carmen. You're on mute. Okay.
Muchas gracias, Osprey. Thank you.
Osprey.
I also want to thank Mirna because
También.
she's in the interpretation right now, and she is part of our team. Today, I want to share with you some of the data about everything that we're speaking with Osprey and with all these wonderful women that are in the panel. Catherine, I don't know if you can make me host so I can share the slides.
Yes,
Please.
1 second.
Thank you. Because we know it's important to hear what the stories of the women, what's going on, their points of view, but it is also important to talk about the facts and the numbers. So if you give me 1 second, I'm going to share my presentation. Because we've been working in Escazú Agreement in order to guarantee the human rights, basically of women environmental defenders, which is the biggest task right now in Latin America and the Caribbean. For the last years, we have seen a number of media talking about environmental defenders killed in many places in the world, like since 2016, 2017, 2018, we've been seeing how the killings of the environmental defenders have been rising. And that's a reality around the world. But especially in Latin America, we have to acknowledge that 2 out of 3 environmental defenders are indigenous, and that the indigenous movement, well, all around the world, but especially in Latin America, that still has this indigenous reivindication, indigenous territories, as well as indigenous people, are in danger. Why? Because the exploitation of the resources have gone so far that now they have to enter into indigenous territories or into protected areas. And that's, well, our development model, how it has been evolving. So in 2019, we had over 300 human rights and environmental defenders. We thought that in 2020, since we were all in lockdown, all the planet was in lockdown, everybody was dealing with the pandemic, we really were hoping to see a decrease on the killings, but actually we saw even more killings of human rights and environmental defenders. So according to Human Witness, we have over 330 environmental defenders being killed in 2020. And this is alarming data because it's a red flag that we cannot ignore. And what's going on around the world in the case of environment, of the killing of the environmental, this is the graphics of Global Witness. We are seeing that most of the killings happen because agribusiness, basically because there is, they want to expand the frontier, the agricultural frontier. Then we have logging. That's why we are losing most of our forests. Mining and extraction is one of the biggest. Every time we see all our appliances, our notebooks, our phones, our computers, everything has these little tiny metals which are coming from extractive industries. The other one is poaching, especially alarming for wildlife also, not only human rights defenders. And the last one is water and dams. And here we can see how in the last 2 decades, the killings of environmental activists has been growing. And usually when we think about the violations of human rights in the world, we may think of regions like probably Asia, Middle East, and so on. But the data show us that the deadliest region for human rights activists is Latin America and the Caribbean, with Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico with the highest rate of killings. And that's because there is all these extractive industries that are involved, that are already trying to take out what's left, because we have a past, a colonial past, where many of our resources have been already extracted. Case of gold, case of silver that end up in Europe, for example. But this has not stopped, and it's increasing, and we are in a crucial decade for this. So these are some of the reports that have been coming out in the last days. This one's from Global Witness, from Article 19 and from Global Witness, that show which ones are the menace of environmental activists right now. Because yeah, like Maria Luisa says, she doesn't understand why the government doesn't hear the voices of the people. And in these reports, we can find very heartbreaking stories on how people have been fighting for not only the resources, but in case of like rivers, in case of against dams, in case of all these things that are going to contaminate and change their ways of life. So that's why it's so important to talk about Escazú. We've been working towards Escazú. Escazú, well, comes from Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration. Osprey already mentioned it, which was in Rio 1992. So since 1992, there's been a number of important dates that led to the adoption of the Escaz Agreement on 2018 and to enter into force last week in April 22. So yeah, the first efforts were like in the 2000s to have something which was the partnership for Principle 10. And then it has grown so much in the last a little bit more than 10 years to push, to have it into policies, to advocate in different levels. So in 2018, we finally had what is now known as the Escazú Agreement. So the Escazú Agreement, it's important because it places human rights at the heart of tackling not only the climate crisis, as Mary Robinson has stated, but also around all the environmental crises that we are seeing right now, whether it's water, whether it's dams, whether it is climate change or loss of biodiversity. So some of the important key issues of this agreement are the definition of environmental information, and that everybody has the right to access this environmental information. The definition of people and groups in vulnerable situation, because what's the problem is that many activists in the cities, they are supporting local fights, and then authorities say, but you cannot talk about it because you're not living in the territories. But unfortunately, the people that live in the territories, they don't usually can access a lawyer, or they can access all the legal system that there is. Well, in Bolivia, we have community justice, which is very important, but still in big cases, like with big companies, they need resources, they need support, they need to really see how these projects are going to impact their lives. Well, there is this is the map of environmental conflicts going on right now. You can enter the webpage and you can see it, how it's updated periodically. And I think we are living in a world of crisis. We are with a pandemic, and despite that, we are not, we are still living under the same market-based, globalization-based, colonized thinking way of doing things. And this has to stop. We really need to change our relationship with nature and stop over exploding, because we are in a critical period of exploitation of natural resources. Because although we have a colonial past of exploitation, the ranges of exploitation that we can see right now are way bigger. And that means that we're not going to leave anything for next generations. So that's something that we have to think about, and that we have to try to get involved and to find solutions. Well, April 22, one of the important days for us, because it's the day that the Escazú Agreement entered into force last week. And in that sense, I have to share one, this is a statement that the National Coordination for the Defense of Indigenous People, small farmers, indigenous territories, and protected areas did on the day of the Earth. And please give me just a few minutes to read it. It's quite short. It says, we are on alert. On Global Mother Earth Day, the government of Bolivia must stop destroying it. The National Coordinator for the Defense of Indigenous People, Small Farmers, Indigenous Territories, and Protected Areas in Bolivia, CONTIOCAP in Spanish, alerts before the public opinion and to the regional and global human rights organizations the following: that the Bolivian government, together with its related groups and organizations, on World Earth Day, has once again put a show with great deployment of resources, approving inconstitutional laws in favor of Mother Earth, which they only have the purpose of distracting and covering up destructive economy policies, which in fact seriously destroys our Mother Earth, polluting rivers with mine waste, violating ecosystems with seismic exploration, causing large forest fires, and promoting the expansion of predatory colonization and the commodification of Earth. These organized shows that supposed to protect Mother Earth also cover up serious violence against our indigenous people, our organizations that defend territorial rights and the rights of nature. They also cover up the silent, anonymous, and unpunished death to which our brothers and sisters of the indigenous people in voluntary isolation are condemned. We denounce that in this eagerness to mount distracting shows, the government of the political party MAS has caused sensitive fractures in social organizations, since these practices of disguising reality are done by fueling confrontation between sectors, causing serious and painful fractures in the communities and in the social fabric, further increasing violence against the defenders of Mother Earth. We appeal to the conscience and intelligence of the Bolivian population and of the world and of the international community, so as not to be fooled by organized shows of these demagogic practices of the Bolivian government, which do not contribute to providing effective solutions to the serious social and environmental problems that afflict our country. Given the aforementioned facts, we human rights defenders say, on this International Day of Mother Earth, we have nothing to celebrate as long as the constituted powers of the state continue to use the name of Mother Earth unscrupulously to cover up crude facts that show a systemic and growing violation and destruction of it. Fight for our territories is fight for the right to exist. Thank you. And I want to share this because it's important to acknowledge these fights. Because, for example, Berta Cáceres, she was murdered in 2016. And this is a campaign that is ongoing right now that's looking for justice for her. Osprey already mentioned it, and still we are on that fight. And we really hope that the Escaz Agreement can be a tool in order to start fighting for our rights and start fighting for our future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carmen, for your wonderful presentation and all of your hard work. And again, to all of the presenters for your, sharing your lived experience of being on the front lines. And I wanted to go ahead and invite all the attendees, the participants, to please go ahead and put questions in the chat or raise your hand and we'll try to call on you to ask any of the panelists questions or to make any comments. We wanted to have this time to also open up the floor for you to have a discussion with all of us and also to learn more about the campaign. So I'll just keep looking in the chat for any questions or comments. There's also been some really interesting reports that people have been putting into the chat section. And also we'll make sure afterwards to put in a blog on our WECAN website, all the different links that came from this particular conversation, the links to the different women who have spoken. We want to make sure that you have the opportunity to hear from Maria Luisa Rafael and Patricia Gualinga and Dara Tocano about the work that they're doing and directly be able to be in contact with their organizations and support them directly in their fights in their different countries. One of the things that I wanted to also mention is that it's really important to sort of step back and realize that we've arrived at the moment where we're having to push for an agreement like the Escazú Agreement in the backdrop of, hundreds and hundreds of years of colonial patriarchal constructs and the ongoing expression of capitalism and an extractive economy. And this intersection of patriarchy, colonization, racism, and capitalism are really now coming to bear in the worst way possible, including the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I think we realize that we're in these multiple systems of oppression, of dominance, this idea of dominance over nature, dominance over women, dominance over the land, and that we have to break this system. And I just wanted to acknowledge that because Indigenous people have been on the brunt end, as well as women particularly, of these systems of oppression. And the Escazú Agreement can't do everything. It is almost like a mechanism we can use to stop the grind of this terrible machine, while we also develop ways out of the system. As an example, in Patricia Gualinga's community, they have the Living Forest proposal, a way to manage forest that Indigenous people have designed and envisioned for millennium about how to care for their forests. So I just wanted to mention that, this Escazú Agreement is key because it stops the halt of a terrible, terrible oppressive system we're in. But we also need to understand that there are many solutions that these women are also offering, but they can't offer those solutions if they're constantly under attack. And so this agreement comes at a key moment where we are looking at, the death and destruction of so many Indigenous land defenders and the last of our biodiverse regions as humanity faces literally, extinction at this point. So I can't stress enough how important it is to protect Indigenous peoples who are on the front lines of protecting their communities, their rights, their territories, and the last biodiversity that we have. I'm looking into the chat section and we're seeing people commenting on There's a question about the Biden summit. Catherine, could you articulate that, please?
Yes, there's a question in the chat that says, any thoughts on the recent Leaders Climate Summit convened by the US President? And it looks like Maria Luisa was raising her finger there.
Yeah, Maria Luisa, please go ahead.
Si me permiten, por
If
favor.
you allow me, please.
Dale, María, puedes hablar.
Bueno, escuchando
Well, listening to the situation that us as leaders, especially myself, I have seen myself very punished. Sometimes I say, why was it worth our fight? How many people has died with the illusion to find justice? Sadly, this pandemic has also punished us. I have been in an economic fight with my husband that luckily is still with life. He had to go to intensive care, and at the end my house has been burned. I don't know if it was intentional, but we are lacking protection. Me and my family suffer because we don't have enough economic benefits. We don't have profits. And sadly, somebody that has provided me with a lot of support, that with Amata from the organization Unitas, has died. And a lot of people in this organization, for this kind of organizations that are expressive, or confronting or fight, are being excluded. I was part of the coordination of the Organization for the Defense of the Lake Uru and Popo in our department, and I have also been excluded from there. Women here are being persecuted, punished, threatened psychologically, financially, but we are still on the fight. There is a lot of vulneration of our rights. There is a lot of violence, psychological violence. Sometimes even from the technicians, from the organizations that manage these systems that say the defense, water and territories, but there is no justice. Sometimes we are tokenized just to express ourselves, and we are excluded because maybe we are not useful for them anymore. And that's our sadness, and my sadness in particular. I already have 60 years, and I have given all my life. Since 2006, I have been in a fight because I have been named in my community, Pacani, in the Popo municipality in Oruro. And there my struggle started. I didn't know that getting this recognition, this naming of being a coordinator for this fight was going to be such a punishment. I was a professor, and there is no production in the countryside anymore. There is no food that can grow in the earth. Many of my friends tell me, what are you gaining from this fight? We are losing so much, but I cannot, because my compromise is so strong. I cannot leave the fight. My compromise is strong, and I hope that my government gets sensitive. But I have little hope, because there is no humanitarian sensibility. Everything is related to what they want to gain. There is no sensibility towards our community. We don't have a house, we don't have income, and it's even worse with this crisis that we have. What is left for us? Please, let's get together, all the women defenders. Let's look for justice. I hope to not die in the pursuit of justice. I have been so threatened. And I am still defending myself and defending my family, even from family members, from cousins, from friends. We see ourselves alone. I hope that each of you, I ask from each of you your help. Nobody makes a campaign for us, but we are part of a campaign that goes beyond ourselves. The only thing we can do is to share what we have and feel for the others that are in the same fight. May God bless each one of you. And don't forget, I will still keep myself strong in the fight because I feel stronger when it comes to this. There are moments when I feel threatened, but this is not going to make me go backwards. Thanks a lot.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Maria. It's very hard. I am crying with you and my heart is breaking with you. And there's many comments from people listening, sending you a lot of love right now and sending you a lot of support. We hear you. That's why we're having this time together. Please know that you are not alone. You are not alone. We are here and we're going to do everything that we can. And that's why, like you said, we're going to bring us together. We are together. You are not alone. And, you know, our tears are with you. Thank you for your tears. And we hear you crying out. And we know that this is a heavy injustice. It's so wrong. And we're going to do everything we can. And we're looking at, you know, this, like you said, there's this one Escazú campaign, but it's so much more. But we're looking at every angle that we can. And we thank you for your courage and all that you have sacrificed and all that your dedication shows and your love. And I hope you feel a lot of love. People are thanking you all over the chat and from all over the world. We thank you and know that this is just one call, but we will, of course, as we have been, be in contact with you to carry on. Please do not feel alone. And we receive your tears deep in our heart. And with that, I want to hand the floor to Patricia Gualinga to say whatever you wish, Patricia. There was a question to you around, you know, how the Escazú Agreement is affecting the Ecuadorian government. It's all very new, so nothing may have happened yet, but just anything you want to say in general, but anything you want to say specifically about the agreement in Ecuador and your needs and your wisdom. Thank you, Patty.
Gracias. Primeramente,
Thanks a lot. First, I would like to send my solidarity, love, and companionship to Maria Luisa, to tell her that she's not alone, that all the story that she shares with us is repetitive in all our peoples and communities. And together we're going to make a strength to keep on the fight. From the Amazon to the Andes, from Bolivia to Ecuador, Brazil, and Colombia, because we are a lot in the world that we have the same problems. With regards to the question, I want to say that the new government is not in place yet. There is a new cabinet, and this is a government that has an agenda that is based on fossil fuels. So there's nothing new here. It says that now it's a right-wing government, and it has an agenda of profound changes, but the policies are going to be based on fossil fuel extraction, roads, and mega projects. And all of this generates the same conflicts that we have been facing throughout the years. We know that there is selling of the fossil fuels beforehand, and the government doesn't have a real proposal to change, to shift the economic model. Ecuador has an extractivist-based economic model, and this is not going to change. And in the meanwhile, we are persecuted and criminalized for the same economic model because the laws of the Constitution and the international law are not respected. I cannot say yet that the government has a positive or a negative attitude, but I know that the agenda is based on extractivism and fossil fuels. Later, we are going to know what is going to happen, but we will still be in the fight and in the resistance, asking for the women's rights to be respected and for the rights of Mother Earth and our territories to be respected in a way that is harmonious with nature and Mother Earth. So there is an equilibrium for our old country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patricia. And Catherine can put in the chat the link to the organization, Mujeres Amazónicas, that Patty's a part of, so you can learn more about Patty's work directly, and we can put that link in the chat and make sure that you know how to contact her there. Thank you very much, Catherine, for putting it there. And there was a question, and then I want to go to Diara to get some more comments from Diara. I want people to also know, because people are asking about the United States. I mean, what we can do in the global north is support this Escazú Agreement. That's why we're creating this campaign, to support this agreement in its implementation. We're going to need funding so that we can ensure that the women have this funding, that they can meet, that they can organize. One of the things we're doing is we're pulling together attorneys from all over the LAC region so that each country, all of these women have legal representation for these agreements and their rights. So there's a lot we can do to support them on the ground in the LAC region directly through funding their organizations and also supporting this campaign. The other thing I wanted to mention is we need to realize how much the global north and the policies that we have are extracting. And we have this model that has been going on for many, many years. So part of the work that we're doing at WECAN also involves very large divestment campaigns, because we also need to get all the deforestation commodities, all the companies involved in that, all of the banks, all of the asset managers who are basically in cahoots with the government going after all of these different territories that we're hearing about from the Indigenous women. So it's multifaceted. We also need to be talking to the financial institutions and making sure that they're respecting Indigenous rights, that they're respecting free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples, and that they're protecting their territories. So there is a host of international mechanisms, the Escaz Agreement being one of them, that are key, including these divestment campaigns against financial institutions to get them to stop deforestation, stop the commodities from the forests, stop fossil fuel extraction in the Amazon. So there's a financial component of this, a financial campaign, as well as these human rights campaigns. And we need all of them at this moment of crisis. And I'm going to hand the floor to you, Diara. Thank you.
Obrigada. Tá tendo tradução. I'm waiting. The translation is working.
Thank you very much. We are having translation. Is it working? Okay. It's very important. O que a Osprey está falando, what Osprey is saying, but when we say that the governments are the main violators of indigenous rights, they are doing this in the name of the lobby of mining exploration. From large multinational companies that always they escape from justice in all our countries. And there is when we talk about the importance of these campaigns, of these divestment campaigns. We need to understand that divestment is necessary to stop destroying the planet. We are here in a fight, trying to have a cultural change, trying to reflect on what we consume and what we produce, all the waste we produce. Because if there is something that is really global, this waste, garbage, the residual, the poisonous residuals that is produced by the industries, that pollutes, that intoxicates, that kills, that's the only thing that is global, because all the incomes from that industries are concentrated in small social groups. most of the population of the planet is suffering the impacts. And I imagine that even rich people must suffer with those impacts. So this divestment campaign is very important. These days, I was seeing the presence of Bolsonaro in the climate meeting. For us here in Brazil, we understood that the Bolsonaro in Brazilian government was very supported by the American government, and it was a very bad pair, Trump and Bolsonaro. It didn't make a lot of difference for us because in environmental issues in the United States, it was always very violent with the indigenous territories. As was said, the global north have been quite violent, the large companies from the north. So here in Brazil, the APIB have been working in these divestment campaigns, especially in Europe, trying to use strategies to make pressure to politicians and to the government to make them to protect our territories. It's very sad to see situations as the one that Maria Luisa said, that she dedicated her life to defend her territory, her life, her family, to have been through the situation that she's living, and to understand that most of the human and environmental rights defenders are suffering. So we remain discussing, trying to demonstrate that these are urgencies. How many urgencies we have? If it's not in the news, those people remain forgotten, and we need to promote people to remind them for not leaving them aside and for not leaving the elderly out of the fight. We cannot allow this system, this market system, even the communications lobby system, we cannot allow them to erase the memory of the more than 400 history of indigenous in these lands. We know how the system works, and we cannot forget from all those people that came before us, especially those that are still alive. We need to make sure they have security. And we need also to make sure to run the education of the youth. I think the opportunity to be here is huge. I hope we remain together and we be more together in the future, and to continue creating education and other alternatives to fight these capitalist dynamics that exploits the nature. Muito obrigada.
Thank you so much, Diara. So I think that I wanted just to answer a little bit more about the Biden summit. We're world leaders. For those of you who don't know, the President Biden from the United States last week had the Climate Leaders Summit. And, there were certainly some advances by governments, towards more stating their nationally determined contributions, their NDCs, as we head into the climate talks at the end of this year in Glasgow. But in the framing of this conversation, there's a lot to be said about the Biden summit, and I don't want to occupy too much of this call on that, but I do want to respond to the question in the chat a little bit in the context to this conversation, which is, overall, what we're seeing is if we're going to really adhere to the Paris Climate Agreement and remain at 1.5 degrees rise in global temperatures, what scientists are telling us, the IPCC report from scientists around the world on 1.5 degrees tells us that we will be in a climate catastrophe if we don't take immediate action. They say we have now, when the report came out, it was 10 years. I think we're down to 7 years now before we are starting to see these really irreparable, irreversible impacts from the climate crisis. All of this is having to do with everything that these women are talking about. Because if we don't stop environmental degradation, we don't protect biodiversity, we don't protect indigenous peoples, who the United Nations has come out studies saying, if you want to protect biodiversity, if you want to protect forests, if you want to protect the land, the custodians of the land, the guardians of the land, the indigenous peoples who have been protecting these lands are the best way to do this. We need to start connecting all the dots here, that indigenous rights, Indigenous land defenders are the front lines of keeping us at this 1.5 degrees rise in global temperatures. So we need to think very comprehensively in a very coherent way and demand from governments, demand from financial institutions, demand from global markets, from companies, fossil fuel companies, commodities, and the different ways that we see the supply chains in different corporations. It all is connected. It's all connected. And so the way the Escazú Agreement and the fight that these women are sharing with us today to protect their lands and territories has everything to do with staying in alignment with the Paris Climate Agreement. There's no way that governments can keep to 1.5 degrees and respect Indigenous rights and human rights without having an Indigenous and gender lens to this agreement. And so did the Biden climate conference last week meet that goal? No. There's a long ways to go and a big gap to make sure that we ensure that climate finance goes to the global south, as an example, where it's most needed. That governments very much take much deeper, serious cuts in carbon emissions and increase their nationally determined contributions. It's not enough what's going on, and there must be a centering of frontline communities, Black, Brown, Indigenous leadership and communities. So my question to all of these world leaders are, where are the Indigenous women? Where are the Black and Brown impacted communities sitting at the decision-making table, sharing their lived experience and knowledge? That would be the kind of transformation that we need. So I would just leave it at that. We are coming to the close of our time, and I wanted to go back to any of the presenters, Carmen, Maria, Patricia, or Dayar, for any closing comments before we close this call, just to maybe have one last comment before we close out. Maybe we'll start with you, Carmen, and then just go around and see if any of the presenters wanted to say one last thing before we close this really important call. Please go ahead, Carmen.
Hello. Well, I am very, very touched for everything that has been exposed, to hear your fights, to hear all of you, and to see the road that we are going through. I think we have made some progress. I think this Escazú Agreement is one of the tools. No, unfortunately, it's not the tool, because we know that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. But I think it's necessary to acknowledge that we are on this fight, that we are trying to defeat capitalism, patriarchalism, and that we need all these fights to converge, and we are on that road. We really hope to see a brighter future, not a future where oppression is is happening, especially toward the most vulnerable, which are basically indigenous people, especially in Latin America, but I think it's around the world. I think we need to change the tendency of the killing of environmental defenders. I think that's urgent. And it's, for me, it's more over the Escazú Agreement. I think it's a moral debt that we all have toward the planet. So, and also an ethical debt that we have. So as people that live in Latin America, we need to start engaging these struggles, acknowledging human rights and environmental defenders, and start joining everybody so we can guarantee their rights. And I think civil society has a key role in this stage, because we have seen that when governments do it, governments end up being the judge and having both parts. And we have to eliminate that. We need a strong civil society, a strong Latin American civil society that can start looking for natural resources, looking for wildlife, looking for rivers, looking for forest, in order to change the threat that we are still in, which is based on colonialism and destruction of resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carmen. Maria, would you like some last words?
Pues sí, por
Yes.
ejemplo, acá en Oruro,
For example, here in Oruro,
limpieza del lago Oruro, que también han debido escuchar,
they are cleaning up a river.
Titicaca, y bueno,
Also in
como dicen,
Titicaca,
hay que seguir con la
as they
educación,
say, we've
hay
got to
que
keep up the education,
expresar y demostrar las
express
experiencias de nosotros
and demonstrate,
para que
show the
los
experiences that we're having,
los
so that
niños
young people and children
ese deber y obligación de
can
cuidar la
understand that obligation they have toward the Mother Earth,
o las personas mayores no lo hacen, ¿no? Sin
that the
embargo,
government or older
estamos en el
people don't do.
departamento de Oruro,
We are in the Department of
haciendo la
Oruro,
limpieza de la basura en la ciudad,
cleaning up trash in the cities,
pero en el lago
on the
Popó
highways.
eso no va a terminar. Lamentablemente el lago Popó ha tenido que
That's
poner
not going to
millones de
stop.
euros para poder
Unfortunately,
hacer
Lake
esa
Popo
inversión, pero no ha podido ser.
requires
Estado en la
2
gobernación.
million euros for a cleanup,
No hay que
but the
desmayar.
government hasn't spent that.
Lo
But we shouldn't give up.
importante es que
We've got to keep on
haya
working.
educación
The most important thing is that we have
no
education,
limpiar, sino que no ocasionar, no promover más basura.
and not just clean up, but promote having no more garbage, recycle and reuse, and try not to use a lot of plastic. That is the campaign that we're doing in the Department of Oruro. Also, the governor isn't quite on board yet, but we're working on the cleanup, and we're hoping that the experiences we're having will not kill us. We don't want to see our Earth killed, because we've got future generations coming, our grandchildren, and for everybody. For those people who are coming behind us, thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.
Muchas gracias, María Luisa.
Thank you very much, Maria Luisa.
Thank you, Maria Luisa. We look forward to continue our conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining us. Patricio Galinga, please go ahead. Any last comments before we close?
Creo que para evitar el derrame de la sangre de los
To
defensores,
avoid the spilling of more blood of defenders of human rights and nature, we need a global consciousness.
lo que genera esto
What
es
causes
la
this
defensa de la naturaleza.
is the defense of nature,
Y si
the
generamos
defense
conciencia
of our rights.
si los
If we have a
políticos
global
toman decisiones
consciousness,
adecuadas, si los
if politicians make the right decisions,
y se podría aplicar realmente el acuerdo
and we
de
can
Escazú.
really apply
Por lo menos
the
en nuestro
Escazu
país
Agreement.
hay el
In our
denominado
country,
interés nacional. Cuando se
there
trata
is
de
a national
petróleo o
interest.
minería, entra
When it comes down to mining or oil, it's part of the national interest.
que violentan derechos
And that means that they violate human rights.
ocurriendo.
That cannot keep happening.
Estar en supremacía los derechos de los defensores
The rights of human rights and environmental defenders need to come first over the economic interests of the nation. Those things cannot happen. We must begin to have governments, whether it's in the so-called first world or in the so-called developing countries that we're in. They must comply with the laws and change their policies, because the consumption that they generate in first world countries has repercussions for all of the other countries. We are all connected. And if they destroy the Amazon, or if they destroy in Bolivia, the Andes, that is also going to affect you. And that global consciousness is about that. Kausaksacha means that we are all connected in relation to nature and life. If it's possible to talk and to be related with one another, we must realize that we live in the same nature, and we need to see life that way. The audience that is listening today should understand what Maria Luisa is crying about doesn't just affect her, it affects you. What is destroyed in the territory of the Amazon or in Maria Luisa's place, that affects everybody. We must be very aware that it is my responsibility, but it is also your responsibility and the responsibility of the governments and companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for your wisdom and your work and always bringing such a great perspective. Gracias. Diara, any closing comments from you? Thank you.
Sil? Hello, I would like to thank you again for the opportunity, for the words, Maria Luisa, Patricia. I don't have a lot of things to say, to add up, because this message of the indigenous people is universal. It's important to understand that to walk on this planet, to be a citizen, it's important to understand and to choose who are we going to have as our representatives, the government, to know what are the things that we are throwing in the garbage, because all of these systems are connected. The impact is connected. The production and the way we consume, either in the north, it can be deadly for our territories. We cannot be away from it, but we have a responsibility, and we are all citizens. We need to develop a new way together, a new culture, a global culture, where we understand that the development and the progress is to protect life, to protect the nature, to allow the diversity, the biodiversity, the cultural diversity to remain existing, because without that diversity, we are faded. So all these initiatives are welcome to educate ourselves as citizens in our communities, in our generations, and stop voting the politics that are with the lobby, with the exploiters that are involving with them. Have a conscious decision that a simple thing as electing our representatives can impact our whole world, all of the systems. We are united as indigenous people, for example, in Amazon, which is a big territory. It's not just one country. It's not just one continent. It's a source of water, for clean water for the whole world, of clean air for the whole world, of culture and knowledge and wisdom for the whole planet, just like all the other regions. And suddenly, having our thoughts breaking down the walls, that everything is divided and separated and the Amazon is very far, but it isn't. It can be very close to your heart, for example. So thank you so much, and that's it.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I just really honor all of you for joining us, the presenters, for your incredible courage, as mentioned, and your love and dedication. And I just wanted to end on two notes. One, please join us, all of you who are listening, or, we'll see this recording later. We need to put a lot of energy behind this Escazú Agreement to make it work and implement it. It's official at this point since April 22nd. So we need to really move forward now and ensure that we can support these women on the front lines as they've shared with you. Their work impacts their communities, but the whole world. And I also wanted to state, especially for the Indigenous Women Land Defenders, something, that I have been really thinking about in different feminist circles, which is we often, because we're in a crisis, we meet in these spaces of, immediate emergencies and crises that we are fighting and that we must be voyeuristas in, and that we must, understand that our lives are on the line, and especially Indigenous people and Black and Brown sisters, their lives are literally on the line. So we meet to fight, to protect ourselves, and do divestment campaigns in the Escaz Agreement and many other things to fight for rights. But we also need spaces that are spaces of healing, spaces of culture, as Diara was talking about, where we can share art and singing and healing and the new culture that we want. And I just wanted to acknowledge that, because I have spent time with all of these Indigenous women in spaces where we're talking about the future and what kind of new culture that can emerge from these crises, and where we can also get healing, and how we can nurture our hearts and be with Mother Earth and have this global consciousness. And I wanted to end on that note, because it's so important after hearing, all of this, that we have the balance of understanding that we need both, because this is a long run. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon, as they say. So I just encourage people to have, both the voyeurist and the healer, and they're both needed, and we need both of these spaces. And these women also have incredible knowledge and solutions that are right at the side of the fight that they bring to the table. So let's go ahead and close there. And please continue to have these conversations with us. We are in solidarity with all of you. You're not alone. And we send our love to everyone. And the fight goes on. And we continue. We'll never stop for our beautiful planet and for our sisters. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you.